So we did talk about kind of the big organizational overview. You have them in your notes. You can kind of, as you hear all these abbreviations, it's important to be like, oh yeah, I'm dealing with the SBSE. I know now, okay, that's small business self-employed. It's important just to kind of understand that at a high level. But these I consider to be more important, and we're going to spend a lot more time on them, is understanding your taxpayer rights. Your job as a representative is to protect the taxpayer rights. There's something called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, coincidentally, or sometimes called TABOR. So the taxpayer rights, well, they're supposed to be guaranteed. Every taxpayer rights when dealing with the IRS. These rights come from constitutional or congressional rights. And the IRS actually came along and adopted a Taxpayer Bill of Rights. It is important that IRS employees understand those rights. They're supposed to be trained to treat taxpayers fair and impartial, and they're to be trained on the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. In fact, the customer service representatives are regularly monitored for how courteously they treat taxpayers, as well as the accuracy of the answers they give. But unfortunately, even with this training, they may occasionally step outside of those boundaries. So it is up to us as practitioners to make sure that we understand those rights, because our job basically is we are to make sure those client rights are not abused or abridged, because we are acting as often a role of a liaison between the taxpayer and the IRS. So we really, in order to act as that in-between or that go-between, we really have to understand the role, of the taxpayer and the IRS here. Originally, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights came out in something called Publication 1, Your Rights as a Taxpayer. You may have come across that, or you may have seen that before. But this Publication 1, there was a new Taxpayer Bill of Rights adopted, and that was back 2014. What they did is they just changed the publication and incorporated the new Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So that is now still called Publication 1, but that's kind of the history of it. Very, very recently, they decided to come out and say, we're going to create a new and revised Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And very recently, being September of 2017, they went ahead and revised Publication 1 again. So when you look at Publication 1, this is the most revised version of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So what are these? We're going to go through each of these individually so that we kind of get a real good feel for them and really digest and understand what rights we're protecting for our taxpayer. Taxpayer Bill of Rights number 1 is the right to be informed. Taxpayer has the right to understand and know what they need to do to comply with the tax laws, no matter how complex they are. That they need to be able to have clear explanations of the laws and the procedures, kind of what's expected of them. But the right to be informed is bigger than that. It's also to be informed of IRS decisions about their own tax accounts and receive clear explanations of the outcome. So if IRS makes a decision about something going on that affects that taxpayer, that they have the right to be informed about that, to have a clear explanation of what that outcome is and what it means. Taxpayer Bill of Rights number 2 is the right to quality service. And some of these were like, yeah, this is happening. The main thing is that they're trying to adhere to a Taxpayer Bill of Rights. There isn't, now, and in giving all these to you too, by the way, there isn't a lot of this is just to say, hey, this is an ideal or a model or what we're trying to go for, but this is our duty to protect these rights. There's not a lot of oversight if they don't, let's say, provide quality service, for example, but it is that we're trying to be tasked to protect these rights. So the right to quality service says they are supposed to receive prompt, courteous, and professional assistance whenever they're dealing with the IRS. They're to be, this is again, the ideal is what they're going for, to be spoken to in a way they can easily understand and to receive communications. I mean, those variety of letters we get, right? Those are the communications that are clear and easy to understand. Well, this is definitely the goal or the ideal, but it also gives them a right to talk to a supervisor about inadequate service. I mean, it's just as they should be courteous and professional, and definitely we should be. There shouldn't be an occasion as a representative that we should be using harsh language or something. But if we're finding out that an agent maybe is having a bad day and they are really going way outside of these bounds, we have a right to speak to a supervisor about that inadequate service, just the same as the taxpayer has a right to talk to a supervisor. So this is Taxpayer Bill of Rights number 2, is that right to quality service. Number 3 says they have the right to pay no more than the correct amount of tax. So that is saying the taxpayer has the right to pay only the amount of tax that's legally due. Now, that legally due is, including interest and penalties, that's still legally due. But they have an expectation that when they make a payment, the IRS is going to apply all those payments properly. So these are all within the right to pay no more than the correct amount of tax, expecting if they make a payment, it's going to go towards that tax. If they have a question on they don't think that the liability is assessed correctly, then they have rights to be able to fight it. So that's kind of where this idea comes from. The 4th one is the right to challenge the IRS position. So that kind of dovetails that last one into this idea. You have a right as a taxpayer to challenge the IRS position and be heard if you're not agreeing with it. You can raise objections, and you have the right to provide additional documentation in response to some sort of a formal action or a proposed action even, that you have a right to say, hey, wait a second, here, let me get you this documentation. You have the right to be able to raise those objections. And you have an expectation as a taxpayer to expect the IRS is going to consider your objection timely. Now, we know there's a lot of things working against this, definitely budget issues that, on the timely aspect, but this is where, in some ways it's an ideal, but we still want to understand, hey, this is where the taxpayer's rights are supposed to be within. They have the right to have the IRS consider any supporting documentation they provide promptly, and to receive a response if the IRS doesn't agree with their position, that they aren't just going to be left hanging after they provide the supporting documentation, for example, that they have a right to receive a response. Number 5, and there's 10 of these, remember, so we're about halfway through, and then we'll take a quick little break in between, but Taxpayer Bill of Rights number 5 is that they have the right to appeal an IRS decision in an independent forum. Again, as I mentioned before, the IRS Office of Appeals is to be separate from the IRS office that is initially reviewing the case, because they can't maintain independence if they're part of the same group or unit or whatever. So there is a right to appeal the decision and expect that it's going to be heard by somebody independent from whoever they have the issue with. The taxpayer has the expectation that appeals will not discuss a case with the IRS if that communication will appear to compromise their independence. They're not supposed to, talk with the agent, let's say, that or have a lot of communications in the background about, oh, well, what about this? What about that? It may appear to compromise their independence, then the taxpayer has a right to expect that they won't do that in the background.